Relying on a former after the publication of her latest book, People Pleaser, Jinger Duggar Vuolo has resumed her interview schedule. The damaging ideologies of the IBLP have been exposed by Jinger, but many were taken aback by Jinger's revelation of the additional detail that she believed her husband would abandon her if she refused to cooperate. Read on to see her remarks. In a recent Instagram post, Jinger announced the publication of her book, People Pleaser, and showed off her arrival in New York City. For Jinger, this was the second trip to New York City to promote a book. Former Counting on Stars' first book, Becoming Free Indeed, delves on her liberation from the dubious IBLP doctrine and was published in January 2023. Jinger's new single, People Pleaser, will highlight her liberation from conforming to other people's expectations. She had a hard time finding her own identity as a young adult, and this story will cover her youth and early adulthood. In a recent interview, Jinger Duggar Vuolo brought up yet another dubious IBLP doctrine. The former Counting on Star claims that her former religion taught its members that wives should submit to their husband's authority at all costs or face excommunication. So much was driven into you via what Bill Gothard said about having to satisfy your spouse, and if you don't, he's going to leave you. She added, that's where a lot of it originated. If they didn't cook supper for their spouse or left the home filthy, they were also warned to. She said, or you aren't always willing to be there for him, before stating, it was all about conforming to his expectations, if you don't. In the same interview, Jinger Duggar Vuolo expressed her honesty about writing People Pleaser and how the anecdotes were very raw. People can take them as they will. The former Counting on Star concluded, okay, I want to be as honest and vulnerable as possible since that's a part of the need we perceive, right? No word from Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar on their thoughts on Jinger's book just yet. However, rumors have it that Jim Bob didn't like reading novels written by his daughters. A song by Jill called Counting the Cost was among them. His alleged deceit about the family's reality TV earnings was one of his dark secrets discussed in the article. Jinger Duggar Vuolo was not unfamiliar with stringent regulations and a regimented framework for relationships since she grew up in a big family under the intense scrutiny of celebrity. Her parents, Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar, had 19 children. A strict Christian upbringing impacted her life and the lives of her siblings, who became prominent figures in the reality series 19 Kids and Counting On. Gender roles, marriage, and the need of subordination within the family dynamic were firmly instilled in this upbringing. Her parents and the revered religious figures in her life frequently stressed the need of a woman completely submitting to her husband's authority. A wife's submission to her husband's choices, desires, and spiritual direction was suggested as a condition for a stable marriage in these teachings. Growing up in the Duggar home taught young women like Jinger that going against these ideals may put their relationships in jeopardy or even cause a spouse to leave. However, as Jinger grows into adulthood and settles into marriage with Jeremy Vuolo, she has candidly considered her upbringing and the values she eventually discarded. Jinger writes about her struggle to separate her religion from the traumatic lessons she learned as a youngster in her book, Becoming Free Indeed. The notion that a husband would abandon his wife if she did not conform to the biblical norm of submission was one of these doctrines. Many parts of her idea of marriage were plagued by worry and anxiety due to this assumption. Jinger has spoken openly about how her early views on God, marriage, and obedience were heavily influenced by her fears. From her childhood forward, the idea of a wife's submission was more than simply a suggestion, it was an eternally binding command. The Duggars' religion was strongly influenced by prominent people like Bill Gothard, whose teachings from the Institute in Basic Life Principles, IBLP, stressed the need of hierarchical systems in marriage and family life. The primary tenet of these beliefs was that a female should submit completely to her husband's authority as head of the home, having faith that he was chosen by God. Jinger and the other young Duggar girls were taught that expressing dissent or thinking independently inside marriage was a terrible thing to do. They were admonished, either directly or indirectly, that disobedience on the part of a woman toward her husband's authority may cause marital strife, which could eventually lead to adultery, separation, or even desertion. This form of teaching, which was founded on fear, put an undue weight on women by implying that their relationships were entirely dependent on their own actions. This lesson made Jinger nervous about getting into committed partnerships in the future. Could she possibly follow instructions to a T? Would her husband's love for her evaporate if she failed in her role as a wife? These questioning persisted until she faced and dismantled the assumptions that had been ingrained in her. A new aspect in Jinger's marriage started when she wed Jeremy Vuolo in 2016. Her relationship with Jeremy was based on collaboration, honest dialogue, and mutual regard, in contrast to her upbringing in a strict, fear-based paradigm. Jeremy pushed Jinger to examine her views and think critically, even if their religion is still important to them as a couple. Jeremy is a pastor and a former professional soccer player. Jinger recounts in Becoming Free Indeed how Jeremy's impact caused her to reevaluate the beliefs she had previously held in high regard. The concept of submitting was one of the most profound changes. She changed her perspective on marriage from a passive submission to her husband's authority to a cooperative relationship in which each partner shares decision-making and leadership responsibilities. In her letter, Jinger states, "Jeremy never demanded that I comply with his every whim. He respects my uniqueness, my goals, and my viewpoints. Love, respect, and trust, not fear, are the cornerstones of our marriage." Jinger was able to adopt a more balanced and healthy viewpoint on marriage with this change in thinking. Love and commitment, she realized, are not based on strict roles that make one person responsible for the relationship's success or failure. Rather, they stem from mutual support. For Jinger, the rejection of religious dogma based on fear is fundamental to her tale. One example of the use of fear as a control mechanism is the assumption that a husband would abandon his wife if she did not submit to his authority. Grace, not fear, is the foundation of Jinger's faith, which she has discovered after escaping from these ideologies. She expresses her realization that God is not a cruel dictator who is ready to punish her for any transgression. He is the Father who loves his children and gives them freedom and forgiveness. Her relationships and her religion have both been profoundly affected by this realization. She has finally broken free from the crippling weight of conformity and the pressure to be flawless. She joyfully embraces the freedom to study, develop, and love with all her heart instead. For women who may have received similar messages growing up, Jinger's story of coming into her own and developing her spirituality is an inspiring one. Her experience should inspire other women to take stock of their religion and marriage, challenge dogmas founded on fear, and look for a more nuanced and healthy perspective. Recognizing that you are not responsible for controlling someone else's behavior brings a sense of liberation, she adds. Marriage is about teamwork, not flawlessness. It's not about dominance and terror, but about love and support. Jinger's bravery and development are on full display in her determination to denounce damaging ideologies. She hopes that by telling her experience, people may be able to discover their own way to freedom, a way where faith is not motivated by fear and love is not dependent on obedience. The harmful and terrifying message that a husband would leave if a woman does not conform does not belong in a good marriage. A good relationship is built on love, respect, and genuine cooperation. A Jinger Duggar Vuolo's tale is a potent reminder of this. Countless women who are also struggling to escape similar beliefs might find inspiration and hope in her path from fear-based subordination to freedom and honesty. Jinger discovered a marriage based on trust and respect when she rejected fear and embraced grace. This marriage flourishes not due to obedience, but to love.